Aloha, I am Amanda Wacker.
Hola, I am Lennice Castro.
สวัสดีค่ะ I'm Asama Lector.
Hi, I'm Zach.
Hey, I'm Dillon Travis.
And we are the Triplicates. Welcome to the 11th of many episodes of the Triplicate podcast. We are three first-generation women of color currently in our first year of our PhD program at the University of California, San Diego.
So last episode, our classmate Omar Lujano dropped by to share about his experience being a PhD student and a DACA recipient. We loved learning about his journey, and if you haven't seen that episode, go check it out.
We are so thankful to be able to share our platform with so many people to amplify their voices. And this week we have two special guests with a very time-sensitive call to action. If you're a grad student researcher in the University of California system, listen up.
Welcome to the show, Dillon and Zach.
My name's Zach Goldberg. I am a second-year PhD student in biology at UCSD in the Perry Lab. And yeah, excited to be here.
What's up? My name's Dillon Travis. He, him pronouns. I'm a fourth-year PhD student in biology, but specifically in the section of ecology, behavior, and evolution. And I'm in Joshua Cohn's lab.
Thank you so much to you both for joining us, Zach and Dillon. We're very excited to chat. And I think a good question asked to start us off is kind of defining what is a Student Researchers United? What is a UAW?
Yeah, it's a great question. I think a good place to start is like, what is a student researcher, right? And I think it's really important to realize that as PhD students, especially in the life sciences, we're workers first, right? We're students second. And I think that's really important to keep in mind, right? We are paid to do labor that benefits our employer. And so, yes, while we're here to learn to be students, we're also workers that are paid for our labor. And so when we say graduate student researcher, what we're talking about are people like us. I think all five of us on this podcast, right? We're paid a salary to do work, and that work is doing scientific research for the university, right? And so Student Researchers United is just a group of student researchers who, I don't know, Dillon, maybe like a little over a year ago? Yeah, started to kind of organize and be like, hey, TAs, readers, and graders in the UC system have this awesome union with this great contract. Why don't student researchers have that? And so that's kind of where it all started. It's like, hey, how can we give student researchers the same kind of benefits that TAs at UC have benefited from, for over 20 years now?
Yeah, I think it's also important to note that our union, UAW 2865, for TAs, tutors, and readers originally was supposed to include graduate student researchers back in the 90s. But the UC lobbied pretty hard to make sure that we as graduate student researchers were not considered employees. And in 2017, a court decision changed and gave us our right to collectively bargain. And since then, we have been building power and networks across the state to essentially form our own union as graduate student researchers.
Yeah, Asama's face was me in my head as you explained this. I knew that there was this new law that allows us to collectively bargain, but I didn't know like the backstory. I didn't realize that we were supposed to be part of the original UAW union for tutors, readers, or TAs, readers, and what else?
And tutors.
Graders.
And tutors. Yeah, you had all the words.
Sorry.
Just not
Graders,
in
Just not in order.
Yeah, it's okay.
Long day. Yeah, I guess why we've kind of touched on this, but like, why create a union?
That's an excellent question. I think the best overarching answer to that question is that a union equals power, and it's a democracy. Everyone's voice matters, and it ultimately always ends in us as workers getting better protections and rights for ourselves. The TAs and tutors union and also the postdocs union at UC enjoy a lot of benefits that we don't enjoy as graduate student researchers, like vacation time, sick time, paternity and maternity leave, just cause, which means that the university or your PI can't fire you just for no reason. They have to provide reasons why. And then ultimately also we get to negotiate how much more money we're going to make each year, which is something we don't have right now as graduate student researchers. It's up in the air. It also allows us to be at the bargaining table. The university no longer can tell us what is happening to us. We get a say.
Like what Dillon's saying, a union is democracy at the workplace, right? That's what it comes down to. We are very used to in our society the idea of political democracy, and that we get to, as citizens, have a say in our electing politicians and what kind of things are decided on by our government. But we're not maybe so used to thinking that way about work, right? And if you think about it, like the workplace is one of the more authoritarian places you could imagine, right? There are orders passed from top to bottom, and you pretty much have to follow those orders, or you don't get to pay rent or eat, right? And so the idea of the union, of any union, right, is to basically, like Dillon was saying, to expand our power, right, as workers. There are more workers than there are employers, and fundamentally, a union is about democracy and dignity at work, right? So that we as workers have a say in what our life looks like when we are at work. And so, for all the specific reasons Dillon just listed, as student researchers, there are a lot of things that we would like for ourselves that we need this mechanism of democracy, a union, to accomplish.
Wow, I am all fired up. Also, random, but Dillon, have you ever thought about these when people give their workers spiel? Because I feel like my brain just went there.
I have a great article I can send you guys about why ants are socialist. It's really good.
I know that one. That one's a great one. Yeah. I always think about bees because they work together. They're more interested in protecting them as a super organism than they are as individuals, right? Mm-hmm. Like honeybees, the workers will give their own lives to protect the colony, which is so sweet.
It's forever. Anyways, back to the show. I know that when I was talking about this to other students, especially those who are not as familiar with the idea of a union or like international students, can you share a little bit about how their rights or benefits or anything might be different at all? And also when it comes to maybe doing their visa or green card application, like does any of that affect?
Yeah. It's a great question. I guess I would start by saying that it's pretty unfortunate that international scholars in this country, in the United States, are often their visa status is held over their head as kind of leverage and coercion. And that's wrong. And so it's totally understandable why international students might be hesitant to get involved and to speak out and to be super involved in some of these things. And it's just unfortunate that we dangle this carrot of, wouldn't you like to stay here in front of international students? That being said, I think the union is especially important to international students. If you look at types of protections that similar contracts around the country at other schools like University of Washington, or Columbia, or Harvard, in their union contracts for their student researcher unions, there are protections for international students that go way above and beyond anything that the university or department would otherwise offer. Things like right now, international students pay more tuition than domestic students. Right now, there are certain things, there are certain fellowships, there's certain pots of money, there's certain sources of support that are only for domestic students, which is kind of a meaningless distinction, right? We're all in the same program, we're all getting our PhD here. And so actually, if you look empirically at what kind of things have been won for international students through student researcher unions, it actually has ended up like really strengthening their position here and making them feel more included and respected as, on even footing legally with a binding contract with their domestic colleagues. And so I understand that it can be really scary, right? Because you're here in a different country on kind of a tenuous visa. And, we've seen that with the Trump administration, right? There were lots of visa scares about international students here. And thankfully, our TA union was really involved in, being able to advocate for those students. And I think that, we need to make sure that our student researchers are protected in the same way.
Yeah, a specific example of the Trump administration last year was trying to say that if you aren't in campus, like on campus working, that you would be just sent back to your home country. And our TAs union put up a really big fuss about that on not only like a campus level, but on a state and national level. We had protests in front of the ICE office. I guess, maybe it was like September of last year. And we had this big protest with all the different unions down there. The Trump administration kind of let go on that, forcing students to be here on campus.
Yeah, and we as the TA union, where I'm also a leader, we're able to pressure the university to put a ton of pressure on our politicians to, oppose things like that.
Right. So I have a question. I guess we are talking about, this is all the stuff. And like, I will link in the show notes some of the stuff that have been accomplished by other student researchers unions at like UW, and you mentioned Columbia and Harvard and stuff. But I guess, can you walk us through the process of like, okay, going from the people in the union have a need that the university is not meeting. So how do we go from we have a need to making the university meet that need? Like, what is that process?
It's a great question. And so basically right now where we are with the Student Researchers Union, and I guess I'll quickly say there are good, not every tutor, grader, reader, TA is a GSR, right? And so there's not perfect overlap. So there are a lot of reasons we can talk more about of why Student Researcher Union is kind of its own thing. So basically we're in the process of forming our union right now, right? And so basically we don't have our first contract yet, right? And so that's the big step that we're working towards. So we're going to form this union. We are going to vote democratically on what our priorities are for bargaining. And then we will sit down across the table from the university and kind of flex our muscles and be like, look, there are all of these tens of thousands of student researchers across the entire state, and we want better, and you have to bargain with us. And so our focus during the initial bargaining is going to be on those priorities that we vote on, all of us, everyone who, all student researchers, right? And basically that's a messy process. And you go back and forth and you compromise and you try to win as much as you can. And then there's a set period that contract is in force for, right? And we'll bring this contract back to everyone again. Everyone will vote to ratify it and say, yeah, we're okay with with the outcome of these negotiations. Then that contract becomes legally enforceable for the entire duration that it is, in force. And so what you can do, if anything in that contract is broken, let's say you are harassed or discriminated against, or let's say that your PI tells you can't take vacation, or let's say you can come up with a whole list of breaches of these things that we want to bargain for. Then you go through the grievance process. The grievance process is one of the best parts of having a union because it's fast and it's effective, and you have a say in the outcome of your issue, right? And so basically, there are, and one of the big differences with the grievance process is that intermediate steps are taken. If you complain to the university that you're being harassed by your PI, or you're being harassed by a colleague or a student or whatever, and you go through kind of the Title IX, kind of the floor that the university sets for dealing with these things, it could take years, and there won't be anything done in the meantime, and you have no say in what is actually done in the end. The grievance process, there's legally mandated time limits. It has to happen fast. Your problem has to be addressed. And even before the investigation or hearing, there are intermediate steps. They can take you out of that lab. They can take you out of that class. They can reassign you. They can take that person off campus, whatever it may be. And so that is the beauty of the union contract, right? Is legally enforceable through a very clearly defined grievance process. And as a steward in the TA union, I help out with grievances, right? Someone will say, hey, I'm being abused by the professor I'm teaching for. He demeans me. He makes me grade more than he said he would. He, tells me that I'm worthless. Right? These are real things, right? And it gets dealt with very, very quickly and effectively.
Yeah, what I really enjoy about that too is that the university isn't the say-all, be-all.
Yes.
You have to. If you can't comment over that issue, then it goes to a third-party arbitrator.
Yes. And yeah, you can say, sorry, University of California, I don't agree with what you've decided to do about this grievance. And then a neutral third party comes and decides what to do.
I don't know where this question would fit in, but
No,
you're saying like we have a lot of power as a union, but like we are housed in a bigger union. So like, can you talk about like SRU versus UAW and how we are together in that?
So forming a union is really hard. It's a hard thing to do. Even as public sector employees in a state with relatively progressive labor laws, it's hard. And our power as student researchers in the biology department is much less than it is than student researchers at UCSD, which is much less than the power of all student researchers at every campus, University of California, which is much less than the power of every worker in every workplace in the United States, right? And so it makes sense that you need a little bit of outside organizing help, right? So UAW, United Auto Workers, is one of the largest, strongest labor unions in the country. It also already represents tens of thousands of graduate students, academic student employees and graduate student researchers. And so what UAW provides, and we can get into a lot of this, is first of all, during the formation process, just a lot of help, right? It takes time and expertise and organizing and money. It takes these things to do this thing, right? It takes money, it takes time, it takes expertise. And so it makes sense for us to not start from scratch, right? That's why we're not organizing all by ourselves as the biology department, right? That's why this is a statewide thing with an international union, right? And so basically there's what it boils down to is there's power in numbers rather. And the larger a structure and the more workers that are included in our movement, the better it is for everyone.
Yeah, that was like very well explained. I feel like I'm learning along with everyone else listening.
Yeah, like I don't know California labor law, right? Like I know I want to improve my life as a grad student. I don't know California labor law, right?
I'm not
like
a
it
lawyer.
Makes sense. I'm not a lawyer, right?
I'm a biologist.
When it comes time for negotiations, the university will certainly have a lot of lawyers sitting on their side, right? And it helps us to have a couple too. Yeah.
Yeah,
For sure.
The UC is the largest employer in the state of California. And we are trying to organize the largest labor movement in the last 30 years in our state. So we definitely need as much help as we can get, especially because it's going to be a hard fight later down the road. Yeah.
And, UAW has, like we said, has a record of success unionizing graduate students and academic student workers. And so it's part of a larger trend, right? And I think one important thing that we always tell people is you're part of a movement. We're all part of a larger movement. It's not just, thinking about ourselves as individuals, but thinking about ourselves as part of a mass movement of workers to, fight for our rights.
Yeah. So you talked about we're still in the process of forming our union. So right now we are in the card signing stage.
Yeah.
Do you want to talk about a little bit of what the card signing actually is and is not? I saw, some Instagram posts about what UC said the card signing was and was not. So maybe we can dispel some myth versus truth here.
Yeah. I'll start by saying we're actually pretty lucky to have, so this is called card check, what we're doing, where all you have to do is get cards signed by a majority of workers, and then you have a union, and they're legally required to recognize that union. That's called card check. And we, as public sector employees of the state of California, enjoy that. Many workers do not enjoy that, and they have to have what's called a National Labor Relations Board election, right? And so that you might have seen that's what just failed with Amazon in Alabama. And so that's an extra step. We don't have to have the extra step. So basically, all we need to do is get a card signed that you guys have all signed, we've all signed, that thousands of our other colleagues have signed, that says, I'd like this union. That sounds like a good idea to me. I would like to be a part of this movement. I would like to be represented by a graduate student researcher union. And if 50% plus one graduate student researcher signs those cards, Lennice has it up, That's it. We have a union. The University of California has no recourse but to recognize a union and to bargain with us towards a contract. And so that's great. I'll say that, to us, card check is the election, right? We're talking to people one-on-one and we're saying, do you want a union? We think it's a great idea. We'd love to have you on board. And they say, yeah, I'd love to sign that card, or no, I'm not so sure, right? What often is, I guess what I'm saying is we're lucky to have card check. It's really hard and it's grueling, and we've literally had to talk to people one-on-one over Zoom during a pandemic across the entire state. But we're actually really lucky in that we only have one election, right? Unfortunately, employers have been allowed to require a second election, which they pretend is the first one. You have to sign cards to authorize an election to have a union. Here, we realize that the card signing is the election. That is democracy. If you want a union, you sign the card. And so if we get to that 50% plus one threshold, we have a union. That's it. And we will start the process of deciding on bargaining priorities, and the university will have to give us a timeline for when they want to bargain with us.
I guess a question, because me, Amanda, and Asama have gone door to door and helped you guys out get some of these signatures. A common question that at least I've gotten is, well, what does it mean signing a union authorization card? Like, by signing this, what exactly am I saying?
Do you want to actually read the text in the black box of that card you have?
Yeah. Okay. So what it says is, I join with my colleagues to improve our wages, our working conditions, and our profession. I authorize Student Researchers United / International Union, United Automobile, Aerospace, and Agricultural Implement Workers of America to represent me in a collective bargaining. I understand that student researchers will elect a bargaining team of our colleagues to negotiate the contract, and that no student researcher will pay any dues or fees until contract terms have been democratically approved by student researchers.
Dillon, you maybe want to unpack that a little bit for us?
The easier way to articulate it is just being like, are you okay with the formation of a union that has the sole purpose of representing graduate student researchers statewide? That the UAW is us. The union is the workers. It's a totally democratic process. There's no people pulling the strings behind us or anything. It's completely up to us to decide what things we want and what things are important to us as student researchers.
Yeah, I think there's a tendency to view a union as this outside entity, right? Which makes no sense, right? Like what we just talked about, a union is just a mechanism of workplace democracy. A union is us. We are the union, right? And that card is just saying, I'd like a union. That sounds great. Sign me up. As Elise read for us, you're not paying dues yet. You're not bound by a contract yet. You are not, there's no union to join yet, right? You're just saying, I think this would be a good idea if the only legitimate legal the entity that can bargain on my behalf is me and all my colleagues. And we call that a union.
So you said something, and I think maybe just to clarify, 50% plus one, bam, union has to be recognized. Are we automatically part of the union even if I didn't sign a card? Like, do I still have to pay dues if I didn't sign a card?
So signing a card, so these are authorization cards, right? So it's essentially a vote. And once we get our union recognized by the California Labor Relations Board, and we get a contract, then we can start collecting membership and dues. So in the past, it used to be that everyone was just a part of the union. That's how it was. There's a court decision a while ago that kind of changed that. So you have to become a member and pay dues if you want to, I guess, be a member of our union, but you don't have to. But it's really important that everyone becomes a member because that shows our power, and then also that provides funds for the grievance process, staff organizers, legal problems that we're going to have, right? Our employer is the largest employer in the state. They have the best lawyers, probably. We also need that. As an individual, I don't understand labor law, but I can, with our collective dues, we can hire lawyers that do.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And, that thing of not being a part of the union is a really tricky one, right? And there's a whole history of right to work laws and, kind of conservatives kind of carving out union, hollowing out union protections in this country. But basically, if you make the personal choice to not join this union, you're still going to benefit from what the union wins for us. And so I don't know if what the right word is, if it's freeloader, whatever you want to say. But if the union negotiates a raise for graduate student researchers, and you're not a part of the union, you're still going to get that raise. You just didn't do any of the work or contribute any of the resources to exert your collective power with your friends and your peers to win that, right? And so while it's not required to be a part of the union, as me and Dillon have said, like a union just means more power at work. It's not some third-party entity. It's not this smoked room cabal doing things on your behalf, right? It's just us, right? It's a mechanism by which we, as workers, as friends, as colleagues, as researchers, gain more power for ourselves. And yeah, I mean, if you want to talk about dues and why they're important and where they go, like that we'd love to talk about that too.
Okay.
So with UAW, generally workers who become members of their union pay 1.44% of their monthly income in dues, which for us is like $20-something, I think. Not very much. And a decent portion of that money goes to our international union. So it goes to support the formation of different unions across the country. The money goes to our strike fund. So if we were ever to go on strike, the university could potentially just stop paying us and we could pay ourselves. And that makes us stronger and gives us more power if we're in a strike. It also goes to funding our like staff organizers who like make these large databases of who's a part of the union, who's not, where do they work, can we contact these people? And then also to our like legal fees as well. If we were ever to get into some legal battle with the university, we can pay our lawyers for that.
Yeah. At the end of the day, the University of California or any large employer are, a multi-billion-dollar behemoth, right? With all of these resources and lawyers and tricks up their sleeves at their disposal. And so I think it's kind of the least we can do as union members to pay a couple cups of coffee worth of change a month to kind of push back on that. It takes money to play this game. And since there's no union besides us, we have to fund it. And so dues are really important.
Yeah. So speaking of dues, right? If a student worker is not already in the union because of whatever reason, and they run into problems and their friends say, hey, like this is something that the union can help you with, is there like a rolling basis or cutoff or something like that so they can benefit from it?
Yeah. So you don't need to be a member to benefit at all from like the grievance procedure. So oftentimes students who are not members of the union reach out because they're having an issue. We file a grievance, we win in their favor. It's like, for example, last year, a student was promised a TA-ship, and at the last minute, the university's like, nope, this class doesn't exist anymore, and the student was without a job. So they were not in our union, but after we filed a grievance saying, hey, university, you either have to pay them money for the entire semester they're supposed to be teaching or like give them a different position, the university immediately folded, offered them another position, the student took it, and then ultimately joined our union. So you don't have to be a member to enjoy the benefits of it.
And you can join at any time.
And you can join anytime. Yeah.
Yep. Yeah, you can join.
But we are encouraging you to join at the forefront. Wait till crisis time.
And I think I want to, for the listeners, just to clarify that right now we're talking about like memberships and benefiting from being a member. Something you can do right now, and what you should do is sign an authorization card.
Yes, and you can sign it online, which I love that. And we can
StudentsResearchersUnited.org.
Yes.
Pretty easy.
Yes. We love a plug.
Yeah. And as that story with Dillon just illustrates, the university is really scared of breaching the contract because there are severe penalties for them doing so. And the reason that grievance is legitimate that Dillon just talked about is because there is language in the 2865 in the TA union contract right now that says even a verbal promise of a TA position is binding. If a professor were to stop you in the hallway and they say, hey, you want to teach for me next quarter? And you say, yes, I would love to do that. I need funding for, whatever. That's binding, right? And so you can't break that promise.
So thanks for sharing. about the process of forming a union so far. Earlier, you mentioned that there are student researcher / worker unions at other universities. Can you share more about what are some of the great works that they were able to accomplish so far?
So I think I opened with this, but I think baseline, I'll just say like the baseline things, and Zach can add some more specific ones from like Columbia or UW. But paid time off, vacation time. We do not have vacation time, and I've heard some horror stories about that. All right. Maternity or paternity leave. As it stands right now, as a researcher, you just have to hope that your PI is okay with you having a child during your program. And sometimes PIs are not very nice about that, right? We don't have any sick time. So that really does suck as well. As I mentioned too, just cause. That's like a big one, at least for me. That's essentially the university, as it stands right now, can just fire us as graduate student researchers whenever they want. They don't have to provide us a reason. But if we do have a union, we can have like this just cause process, which means that they have to list the reasons why they want to fire you. And before there's anything really happens, there needs to be a meeting with you, a union representative, and the university, which is like super important, right? And that usually really helps people from getting booted from, like, there's people in our program that have been, kicked out. That probably could have, been moved to a different lab if we had this just cause thing.
Totally.
So those are just a few. Zach probably has a couple specifics he can mention as well.
Yeah, I just have this thing up. One cool thing that applies to any union member anywhere in the United States is something called your Weingarten rights, which means that, which is named after a National Labor Relations Board decision from a couple decades ago. It means that any sort of disciplinary investigation into you whatsoever, you have the right to a union representative to be there with you to help you through it. And so that is great just by itself. That's just something that automatically comes with being a union member in the United States. There are things like protection of there's like a protection and safety at work, right? There's been a lot of stuff that the TA union has been able to win with COVID right now. As far as making sure that no one has to come into campus if they don't want to, that all healthcare related costs relating to COVID would be paid for by the university. There are things about, like we said, international student rights. There are things about, we talked about discipline dismissal and dispute resolution, childcare benefits, and like also fee and tuition waivers is another big one. And basically this is not an exhaustive list, right? Because we're going to brainstorm and vote. And so if there's something about being a grad student here that you don't like, or something you wish you had or wish could be better, we can do it, right? And so I just those are just some of the things that have been won at other union in other union contracts for graduate student researchers. But really, the sky's the limit if we can organize around it.
Before we move on, I do have another question. It goes back to some of the questions I got when I went door knocking. And it is here at UC San Diego, and this might be true at other universities. There is a union that we are a part of sometimes. And I think I would want you guys to clarify is, so why do graduate student researchers specifically need a union, and why is it not the same as the TA union?
Yeah, there are a couple of reasons. First of all, I should say it might end up that we all end up in the same local at the end of the day. Some of that is a little bit to be decided. University of Washington, all student employees are in the same union. And so we'll see. But there are reasons why, first of all, there's not, like I was saying earlier, there's not a perfect overlap between TAs and GSRs, graduate student researchers. We're all in the biology department here. We're in an extra weird situation. We don't teach very often. We only teach 3 times. And we are only covered by that awesome union contract for the quarters in which we're teaching. I spend, and I'm sure all of you spend most of your time in lab as a lab worker, as a researcher. And so right now, the contract says nothing about that. There's nothing that happens in your lab in the course of your research that is covered by a legally enforceable contract of your rights right now. And so that is really the heart of it, right? We need legal protections at work, right? Every worker deserves that. We're no different as student researchers. And so we're basically trying to, this awesome thing we have of this really strong union contract that we're gonna bargain over again next year for the TA union. We want to have a similar structure in place for what happens to us in the lab or what happens to us, in the course of our research.
I don't know a good transition into the...
Let's talk rent strike.
There you go.
Yeah, okay, here's what is going on. And you guys can jump in with specifics. What I know is that October 2020, they raised my rent. I know that because I moved in the month before that. And then I got a little thing saying, you paid this much this month, you're going to pay us a little more next month. And then they pull up, I don't know, I guess it was last month in March. And they were like, we're going to raise the rent an astronomical amount of prices for everybody moving in after July, a date in July, maybe. And for everyone that lives here already, we're going to raise your rent again, another 3%. Love that for you. And I think for my room in particular, it went from being $843 to $853 from the first month to the October rent raise, and then it's gonna be about $870 something, maybe a little bit higher. Yeah. I don't know. They sent me 2 notices already about it. But for people moving in who are coming in from this next school year or us starting in the fall, it'll be $1,390 something for them. Yeah. For the same room, the same amount of square footage, basically literally the same thing. And that's really not fair. It doesn't make any sense to raise the rent that much.
Yeah. So here at UCSD, there over the past 3 years, there have been over 1,200 new graduate student apartments that have opened, that have been built. I live in one of them right now. I think the 3 of you do also. And so there was all this new graduate student housing built, and it was supposed to keep rents low. And I will say that before all of this started, on-campus graduate student rents at UCSD are much lower than at other UCSD campuses. And so they said, we're going to build all this new housing. It'll be like we have now, but just more people will get to enjoy it. They'll be able to live affordably as a grad student near work and enjoy, an acceptable quality of life, or a somewhat acceptable quality of life on whatever meager stipend we decide they deserve. So all of this new housing was built. It was all financed by private loans through private banks. And it was all, so it's a giant mortgage. The university has a giant mortgage that they have to pay a mortgage payment on for all of these new buildings. And what they did is they are basically saying, oh man, we have these giant mortgage payments to make. We did the numbers wrong. We don't have the money. Where are we going to get it? And of course, their first answer is from the people who can least afford it, from graduate student tenants, right? And so that's the background, right? They're basically saying we want to raise rent between 40 and 85% overnight on graduate student housing because we made a mistake. We overextended ourselves financially. We are now beholden to these private banks who have these giant mortgages leveraged against us. And so we screwed up, and so we're going to make the poor grad students pay for it. And so, yeah, Amanda, like you were saying, the room I'm in right now, I pay, I think, $860 a month for it. It's pretty nice. This person who moves into my room after I move out under this current plan, will pay almost $1,400, which is way more than half of my take-home pay every month. It's just absolutely unacceptable, right? The university is basically saying this is the end of affordable housing on campus for graduate students at University of California, San Diego. You cannot come here and be a grad student unless you can afford really expensive housing that is more than half of your paycheck. And depending on the department, up to 85% of your paycheck, right? And so, yeah, just like you said, they're making these costs fall on us as residents, as tenants, right? They're basically, we have to finance their mistake to pay their mortgage. And it's absolutely unacceptable. And so, like you guys were kind of hinting at, we've been doing a lot of work around that. And we're basically telling the university, absolutely not. It's unacceptable to us. 3% is too much for current residents and also for our future colleagues that are going to come here and continue to make UCSD a place where graduate student excellence is achieved. They're just not going to be able to have an acceptable standard of life here. And it's really just immiserating graduate students for kind of backroom accounting purposes. It's really callous and cruel. And so, at the end of the day, we as tenants just, you can extend a similar argument from workers in a workplace to tenants in housing, right? There are more of us than there are of them. We finance them. We pay them rent every month, right? They make money because we pay them rent. And so right now we're just saying, we're not going to pay rent right now. You must meet our demands. You must cancel these rent increases. You must come to the table with us as tenants to come to some sort of long-term agreement about rent increases and about tenant representation in decision-making on campus with housing, so that we don't have to do this every damn year, right? We can't just cancel these rent increases. They'll just do it next year, right? Mm-hmm. And so it's this larger issue, again, of reframing this power dynamic of basically saying we as tenants are not going to pay rent until you make this a place that is worth paying rent at, right? Mm-hmm. And so that's happening right now. We kicked off our rent strike on April 1st. So we're about 3 weeks in. We have, I think, around 600 residents of graduate and family housing who are rent striking right now, including the 4 of us, I believe. And yeah, we're basically saying you make a lot of money from our rent. And if you want it again, you're going to have to meet our demands. And our demands are to not ruin the experience of being able to live affordably at this school as a graduate student.
Right. And there's precedent for our rent strike by the UCLA rent strike. And I think they are in month 10 of rent striking. And
that's right.
Can you talk a little bit about, I heard some of their demands are met, but I think they're still pushing for more.
So there have been a group of, I want to say, about 150 rent strikers at UCLA. Like you said, they're in their 10th month here over similar concerns. Huge, massive rent increases, insufficient rent relief for COVID-related, hardships, spouses losing their jobs, et cetera. And a whole litany of other issues very similar to what we're having here. And yeah, they're 10 months in. And they've already had some really important victories. All the rent increases that were planned at UCLA this year are canceled. There will be absolutely no repercussions against anyone who was rent striking. And so they just pay back their rent, no late fees, no consequences of any kind, no questions asked, which is great. And so it continues because while, like I said, canceling this year's rent increases is great. It's a little bit of a way to weasel out, right? Where you can just do it again next year.
Pushing the can down the hill.
Yeah, just kicking the can down, be like, okay, well, they're angry now, but they won't remember about this in a year, right? And so the fight continues. What I will say, one of the cool things that we've modeled, we modeled a lot of our action off the ongoing actions at UCLA. And I just want to be very clear that none of these students have been evicted. None of them have been charged late fees. None of them have had any academic consequences whatsoever. The university, it turns out, is actually, despite all their empty threats, really, really scared of us as tenants, right? Just like with the grievance process, they're terrified of us as workers, as they should be. There are more of us, right? And so I just want to make the point that, it's a scary thing. It was scary for me to not pay rent April 1st, right? That's a financial obligation that I've signed a lease and agreed to. But basically I'm saying is no. So far, it's been great, and we're adding people every day. And, the more of us are involved, again, the less that they can, the less kind of retribution they can take, and kind of you can't fire all of us kind of thing, right, with the union. You can't evict all of us. but also we're more likely to win our demands, more people to get involved. And so it's been a really cool thing to be involved in. It's just tenants who are really angry at our landlord, and our landlord happens to be the University of California. And so, tenants, unions, movements are springing up all over the country. It's not unique to student housing by any means, but this is kind of our attempt to say enough is enough. The people we as tenants, the people who can afford it least, should not be asked to pay the most. And that living affordably during grad school is, just a fundamental dignity of life issue.
There's another issue with this rent strike and why it has come up to this. And it's because the UC has the audacity to say the solution is to stick 2 of us in this room. There's no space.
90 square foot room.
2 adults with their own lives.
Yep.
Yes.
Yeah.
Not like 17-year-old college freshmen. Like, bunk beds out? Are you kidding me?
We're grown-ass adults.
What kind of quality of life is that? Yeah, that's ridiculous.
Yeah, and so it's this really disingenuous, bad faith move that they've made. They'd be like, well, these new rent rates might seem expensive, but if you cut them in half, they don't seem so bad.
They don't seem so bad.
And the way that they're saying is like, well, just share your bedroom. Just shove another bed in here. I think the studios are about 250 square feet. They're small. They're little shoebox studios. They're small. And now they're saying those are eligible for double occupancy. Look how affordable this is. You can split a studio. It'll actually be cheaper than before. I literally cannot. I have friends that live in the studios. I cannot visualize where you would even put another bed. It's just an It's an absolute farce. It is just demeaning, demoralizing, and just cruel. That to say that if you want to be able to eat and have a place to live and be a grad student, you have to degrade yourself and not live like an adult. Mm-hmm. And so it's very frustrating. I think one of our other big demands for this rent strike is that they stop marketing housing as double occupancy at all. When they talk about the rate of a room, they need to talk about per room, not this weird like per bed thing they're doing. So say, well, if you put another bed in, you can split it. But really what they're hiding is the new cost of the room, which is exorbitant.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And we've definitely, I can go on and on about how this is just wrong. But I think we should talk about more of the legal stuff that goes into participating in a rent strike. Amanda, I know that you had maybe some questions.
Right. So frequently asked questions. What is this going to do to my credit score? Can I strike as an international student? Like, what's going to happen to me? And then another one is I guess you mentioned no one's gotten evicted, but I don't know, that didn't happen at UCLA. Could it happen here? Is that feasible for them to do with 600 people?
Excellent questions. And Dillon, feel free to hop in. Great questions, Amanda. The credit score issue is an easy one to answer. The answer is no, this will not affect your credit. The university does not report to credit agencies. We tend to think of credit scores as this official thing. It's totally voluntary. It's just that a lot of private banks collude with each other to keep track of you. The university does not report to credit agencies, so there's nothing to worry about there. It's also true if you were to not pay your tuition or something.
They only leak your social security numbers.
They'll only leak your.
All they'll do is let hackers steal all your personal information and dump it out on the web.
Absolutely. I'm dealing with my social security number being on the dark web right now, as I'm sure all of you are too. I'm calling my mom's tax lady. I'm you need to do my taxes ASAPually. And she's send me your tax forms over WhatsApp. And I'm you know what? Nothing could really go wrong. Yeah. It's already on there.
I honestly, at this point, do you just want to go around and say our social security numbers? It can't be any worse. And so, so you will, it will not affect your credit score. It will not affect you academically, and you will not be evicted. Not only is it absolutely 100% illegal to evict anyone in California until I think June 31st because of the pandemic. Also, like I said, they're actually really scared. it looks really bad for media and for admissions and for morale and for faculty, right? Faculty have been really angry about this. If they were to literally dump a grad student out onto the streets because of not being able to pay. Like, imagine as an educational institution what that would look like for them, and how stakeholders at the state level, at the regents level, at the campus level, how they would react to that, right? There is some limit to this at some point, right? And so again, also, can't evict all of us. The more of us there are, the less they're able to do. And so no, I don't think evictions are on the table here. And also academic repercussions are also not on the table for a very interesting point. The university continues to very strongly say housing is not a workplace issue during union negotiations. They'll say, we will not bargain over housing. This union is a workplace union, and so housing is not work, and so we will not bargain with you. Or, it's not a work issue, it's not a campus issue, it's not an academic issue. So, we won't bargain with you about housing during union contract negotiations. Well, if they start to have repercussions for us at work and at school over issues of our housing, that puts them in a very awkward position next year for collective bargaining, right? The union lawyers will now say, well, clearly you think housing is a workplace and a campus and a student issue because you punish students academically and you punish them at work for things that happened with housing. And so they are deathly afraid of that. I mean, man, how amazing would it be if we could negotiate through our union about housing? If we have something in our union contract that says no graduate student researcher can pay more than 30% of their income on housing. Like, imagine how that would change people's lives, right? They're terrified of that, right? And so they actually are being very deliberate and very careful to kind of maintain this artificial division that they've set up for themselves. And so, yeah, nothing that happens here with this rent strike, with any action around housing, it's not going to spill over into your workplace. And actually, we've found that a lot of PIs and faculty especially are also really angry about this. How can you say, that you're providing a good environment for the people in your lab when they can't afford to live in a place that is, provides them adequate shelter? How can you tell prospective students, hey, come to the University of California, San Diego for graduate school, if there's nowhere for them to live? And so there are actually a lot of reasons besides, in addition to just the money that they're missing out on because we're not paying rent, that their hands are pretty tied actually as to what they're going to be able to do. And so far, it's been great.
Yeah, I think it's interesting to, like, me as a person see all these things going down, considering that for a while now, about a year, our homes have been our workplace
100%.
Since we are in a pandemic. So it'd be interesting how that perspective pans out.
And I wonder how, I'm sure that post-pandemic, home will be more of a place of work than it was before the pandemic, right? Even if we're not all at home right now, right? I think that something has changed, right? I think there's a lot more work that will happen at home. And so, hopefully going forward, we can make this a big issue, but the university is really scared to go back on their own word that housing is not an academic or a workplace issue, which obviously it is.
Mm-hmm. I would also like to point out, I think that's the first time I heard Lennice call it I almost said something else, a pandemic instead
saw you.
A panoramic or a pan dolce ED press.
Yeah. We don't say pandemic in this house.
Pedantic.
No, we don't.
Pedantic.
The other day,
Pentagram.
didn't say Ponder Replay?
A Ponder Replay.
That was a good one. That was a good one.
A Pandemi Lovato. That was a good one too.
A Pantene Pro V.
Pantene Pro V.
Anyways, okay. I think another thing that Zach brought up during his little spiel was that faculty are mad, admin are mad, and there's several reasons for this, but I think it was interesting the timing of the rent increase, and I feel like that's also why these people are mad. I think someone mentioned the timing. It was they announced this in March, which is just so happens to be right after most recruitment sessions, but before they start signing leases. I thought that was interesting.
I mean, we had at our virtual recruitment, we had a whole session about housing where we took people on virtual tours of the graduate student housing complexes, and we told them that actually you can afford to live here. That actually it has nice amenities. You can be close to campus, and you don't have to pay this exorbitant percentage of your paycheck. That actually this is a cool thing we have here, right? And then 2 weeks later, well, now I feel like I've lied to these poor incoming students, right?
Yeah.
And yeah, the timing is suspicious. Also, faculty seem to be a little bit more mad about the timing than they are about the increase themselves, which is something I don't think we have time to get into, but that I have many thoughts about. So now they're trying to kind of placate everyone. They've kicked the can down to October, and they basically said no currently admitted student from this spring will have this new rent increase. But next year they will. And so there's a lot of placating and like soothsaying and a lot of like, it won't be as bad as you think right now. Oh, we'll delay this for a few months, but the fundamental issue remains. And I'd like to push back a little bit. Admin aren't mad about this. Admin are doing this, right? And I think it's good to delineate kind of the three groups of students, faculty, and admin, right? Both students and faculty are employees of admin, right? Admin are the boss, and our power relations with faculty can be complex, and our PIs are also our employers, and so it's not quite so clear cut. But I just want to make clear that like this is a really cool issue on which faculty and students are united, are kind of offering a united front against admin to kind of reverse this decision.
Mm-hmm.
So you talked about how being a UCSD grad student should be an affordable place. We should be able to live here, work here, get our PhD here. Another aspect of that is you talk a little bit about how the union might be able to make lists of demands, and one of them including stipend increase so that students can continue to be able to afford to live and work here despite housing increase or any inflation rates in the future.
Yeah, so in 2017, when we got our right to collectively bargain as graduate student researchers, the university put out a statement, I think in the courts, saying that essentially the reason they do not want us to unionize is because they have to pay us more money. So look at the TAs union and the postdocs union, they have a negotiated wage increase every year for X amount, however long the contract is. As graduate student researchers, we just kind of have to hope that the university is going to pay us more. Obviously, that's BS, and by having a union, we can negotiate our wage increases. But also, we need a cost of living adjustment just across the all graduate students on all of the UC campuses. We're treated a little bit better as STEM students compared to a lot of the humanities and social sciences. And hopefully with the formation of our union, we can get them substantial increases in wages and then also get, decent wage increases for ourselves too. So they aren't rent burdened and spending, 85% of their income on rent.
Right. And I totally forgot what I was just going to say. I'm so sorry.
Happens.
Oh, yeah. I was going to say is like the reason a cost of living adjustment is so basically that there is an automatic raise that is tied to the annual cost of living in whatever city you're in, is that especially on the West Coast, especially in California, the cost of living over the past few decades has far outpaced inflation, right? So they can say, well, you're making, just for inflation, you're still making a little bit more than you would be in 1990 or whatever. But if you think about that, so like beating inflation, which we barely are, and in some years we don't, long term, that the cost of living in California is exorbitant. It's a really expensive place to live, and that's true at every UC campus. And we just aren't paid enough, right? We aren't paid enough for the work we do, and we aren't paid enough to live comfortably without some sort of subsidized university graduate student housing, right? And I just think that's so important to realize that part of being a graduate student is being a person who has a life, who has a house, or, who, has a place to live that they can go back to and feel safe and secure and happy at, right? And so it's not just, right? So it's just such a fundamental issue. We're already underpaid. And then you add on top of that we live in one of the most expensive states in the country, and that our raises have not kept up with the rate of the increase of that cost of living. And you get the situation where a lot of our colleagues are financially strained, and even worse are the people we don't see, the people who say, oh, I can't go to graduate school. I can't afford it. I can't become a scientist. I can't become a historian. I can't become an English professor. Whatever it may be, that is just not an option for me because I cannot afford to make this little money for 5 years. And so it really filters who thinks of themselves as someone who is worthy of a PhD and who can be attain academic achievement at the highest level, which is what a PhD is, right? And so that part also makes me so sad. It's discriminatory. You're basically saying the only people who can come to grad school are the people who can afford or have outside help to not be totally just dependent on their stipend. And that would absolutely be the case with these rent increases that we've been talking about. There's just no way that the stipend in any department that we currently have would make it easy to live on just the stipend, right? So if you're lucky enough to have parents or a trust fund or an inheritance or whatever it may be, right, you'll be fine, right? And those types of students will still come. And it's just, it makes me sad that the discriminatory aspect of it across like race and class and ethnicity and origin and background and all of that, it's just too expensive to be a grad student, and it's only going to get worse with these rent increases. And so it's also a diversity issue, right? I want to make that so clear, right? Schools do so much hand-wringing. Oh, why aren't our student bodies more diverse? Why aren't they more socioeconomically diverse? Why aren't they more ethnically diverse? Why aren't they, all of this kind of stuff that is, being talked about a lot right now, when the number one thing that they could do to increase diversity at their campus is to pay people more so that more people can afford to come to graduate school. It's that simple. If you already have 2 kids and you have a house and a mortgage to meet, you can't be a PhD student without some sort of other source of income. You just can't. And so it just makes me so sad too, that it's just like, we're in such an amazing intellectual environment where we are paid to do research, to find out more about the natural world, to learn and to grow and to do work. And there's so many people for whom that's just not an option because we aren't paid enough. And so, something has to change. If schools really actually care about the diversity and inclusion that they pretend to care about, they need to make it possible for more types of people to live comfortably in grad school.
Mm-hmm. I definitely resonate with that. And I know, Dillon, you shared a story before about things that you've had to do to supplement your income. I know
What things?
Triplicates, oh, girl, don't do that. I know we, I don't know. We've been trying to get jobs because we're like, I'm worried about making car payments. I'm worried about paying for my insurance. All these things that it's just like, all of a sudden it's like, you can't increase my rent, give me the same amount of money. And now I have all these other bills on top of that. I'm stressed.
My best friend, super smart guy. He just after undergrad, he's like, no, I have to start working. I have so much student debt. I have to start paying it off. I don't have a choice. I can't go to grad school. Are you kidding me? That's just going to be extra years that my crushing student debt haunts me for, right? Mm-hmm. And so there are just all these reasons. This is all part of one story, right? This housing stuff, the union stuff. It's about realizing that we deserve better, right? And realizing that you should come to graduate school, you should be a PhD student, and what you should think and worry about is your research and your learning. You shouldn't have to worry about finances or shelter or food or car payments or whatever it might be, right? You should just be able to come here and do what you're here to do, which is get a PhD.
Perfect. I love that. Let's take a break. And then when we come back, I would love to hear immediate actions all of our listeners can take to support the efforts going on. Xenofactory is a Black-owned skin and body care line.
Created by a biochemistry college graduate who loves taking an extra step into the world of luxury self-care at home.
They sell whipped body scrubs that are natural and vegan friendly while also providing your skin with a glow.
So if you're coming home from a long day of meetings or from being stuck in the lab, when you add Xenofactory products to your wind-down routine, you'll know your skin is being spoiled with the richest ingredients. You can follow them on Instagram and Facebook at Saintedfactory and purchase at saintedfactory.com.
So, welcome back, everyone. Before we say goodbye to Dillon and Zach, I would love to hear actions our listeners can take right now.
So if you happen to be a graduate student researcher, University of California, you should go to studentresearchersunited.org and you can electronically sign an authorization card for all the reasons that we've talked about for this last hour. If you're not, find out if your workplace is unionized, if you're not sure. And if it's not, start that process, right? It is my firm belief that every worker in the United States or in the world deserves a union, deserves democracy at work. And there's a lot you can do to talk to your coworkers and to kind of get it in their heads that they deserve better. And so I'd say, if you're here, great. Where you happen to be, sign a card. If you're not, talk to your coworkers about why everyone deserves a better life.
Absolutely.
Thank you for that. Let's round out the show. Let's do some observations, run some stats in our data, which we're slowly getting better at. Not really. I don't know.
This part gets Amanda every time.
This biostats class, man. My gosh. Anyways, take it away, Asama. What's the question of the week?
All right, so the question for the week is, how many PhD students in our study believe we deserve collective bargaining rights?
Yes, ma'am.
Yes.
Yep.
Sama, yeah. Zach, Dillon? I assume yes.
They're just looking at
yes.
I couldn't hear the entirety of the question.
It's fine.
Stable internet. Strikes again.
Well, it seems that 100% of the PhD students in our study are pro collective bargaining rights. Woo!
And
yeah.
if there's any future topics that you would like to hear from us, or if there's anything you would like to share with us, please feel free to reach out to us on the internet.
Yeah, and you can find us on Twitter and Instagram at triplicatespod, and you can email us at triplicatespod@gmail.com. If you like us, support us on patreon.com/triplicatespod.
So you can follow us on Instagram at SRU or Instagram.com/SRUUAW. We're also on Twitter and Facebook if that's your thing too.
And then, if you're interested in getting involved with any of the housing action that's happening right now, you can send an email to freezerent@ucsd@gmail.com. And we will, whether you are a tenant or just a supporter or interested in doing something similar where you live, we'd love to hear from you.
And with that,
Obrigada. Ciao.
gracias y adios.
Kapun ka. Bye.
Bye. Thanks
So
for having us.
long, farewell. I need to say goodbye. No.